Thank you for coming to the interview. I'm a big fan of the Mezo, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for having me.
Early this year, I remember that April, so I found the Mezo on the Twitter and I'm very excited about the Mezo. So I'm actually deposit my Bitcoin into the Mezo for
Oh,
one
nice.
year. Yeah, at that time my rank is about the 30, but I don't know.
Welcome and excited to, I don't know, I'm excited that we're getting ready for testnet. So excited to get this stuff out and people getting to see what we've been working on.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So let's just start it. So my purpose is to just spread over the Korean communities about the Mezo, and then I want to just deliver the what Mezo is developing in the ecosystem. Yeah. So can you explain what Mezo is and what it aims to achieve?
Of course, yeah. I've been building on Bitcoin for about a decade now at Thesis. And we built all sorts of things. We built a project called Fold, which is actually getting ready to go public in the US markets. Another one called tBTC, which is a Bitcoin bridge and an alternative. But, as much as I've tried to make Bitcoin more useful in the Ethereum space, it's become pretty obvious that Bitcoiners want their own place. They want their own chain, their own economy, and they don't necessarily want a copy paste of the next Ethereum project, right? So the idea with Mezo is it's really about solving a social problem. I think a lot of people lately, you'll hear about 90 Bitcoin L2s, which they're not L2s. Most of them are sidechains at best. But you'll hear about them all cropping up, and they'll talk about all these different technical changes. But if I know anything, it's that the only L2 we really have right now on Bitcoin is Lightning. So we're not trying to build an L2, and we're not trying to solve a tech problem. What we're trying to solve is a social problem. Bitcoiners want a place kind of like Ethereum, kind of like Solana, where they can build their circular economy. So that's what we're doing in Mezo.
Thank you for explaining. So when you check your document and then you use the Bitcoin economic layer. So what is the definition of the Bitcoin economic layer?
I hate this what is an L2, what isn't an L2 discussion. I think it's a huge waste of energy. And so we just want to be clear, what we're building is economically aligned with Bitcoin. What does that mean? Gas is in Bitcoin. Fees go to Bitcoin holders. So if you hold Bitcoin, you're king in this ecosystem, and that's the point. It's not it's not some project with a token shoehorned into it, right? It's not a chain where ETH is actually gas or something else. So that's why this economic layer idea is so important, is we just want to make sure that what matters is economic alignment with Bitcoin holders. Otherwise, who else are you aligning with?
Once the Mezo launched to the public, the Bitcoin could be used for the gas fee. For the gas. And then all the Bitcoin could be used for the ecosystem. That is the main differentiated to other
it's a little bit more than that.
Right?
Yeah. So that's one piece, and the other piece is that the chain is run by Bitcoin stakers, and so everyone who's locked up right now and deposited in Mezo, as the bridge goes live, they can start staking and running the chain. And the idea with that is that you look at something like crypto fees.info. If you look at where revenue flows on chain, I look at that and I'm like, why isn't that going to Bitcoin? And so we want to see not just chain revenue and emissions go to Bitcoin holders, but also if there's lending, well, that should go to Bitcoin. If there's a stable coin, that should go to Bitcoin. If there's a DEX, that should go to Bitcoin. So we're really trying to take all these DeFi projects that have really not innovated in a while, and we're trying to collapse them all down into one experience. And so this chain is really not going to be the place for 10 copy pastes of Uniswap. We want to have all of that built in. The idea for Mezo is you have all that stuff built in. It's very straightforward if you're a Bitcoin holder. If you want to do something a little bit different, if you want to get involved with SocialFi, GambleFi, any of these things, then this is a good chain for you to build on. But we're trying to avoid Uniswap forks. We're trying to avoid low-hanging DeFi and just kind of make sure that all those fees go to Bitcoin holders.
Yeah. So what inspired the creation of Mezo, and why was it important to develop the layer 2 solution for the Bitcoin?
Yeah, so when we created tBTC, something was really clear. There needed to be a reason for people to move over. So the last time we've seen Bitcoin really move from chain to chain in a big way was WBTC and DeFi Summer in 2020. And if you look, since then, it's been mostly down, right? Slowly, but it's been going down. And so that told us that even though we had built tBTC, and even though it's a decentralized alternative to BTC, that's not enough. People still need a reason, right? You don't, just because there's a new bank next door, you don't switch your bank account. You wait until they offer you an incentive or maybe a new feature that you want, right? So, over the years, we kind of saw this happening, and we said, okay, well, tBTC needs to exist for all this other work we want to build. But what people really want is not Bitcoin on Ethereum. What they really want is Bitcoin with superpowers. They want Bitcoin that earns them more Bitcoin. They want Bitcoin that they can take loans against, and they just want it to be simple. And so that's really what we focused on is how can we simplify things for Bitcoin users. And it turns out that when you have the power to actually change the chain, you can do way more as a developer. And that's been really powerful to realize the ecosystem we're trying to build.
Yeah, how does Mezo improve the scalability and transaction costs on the Bitcoin network?
It's pretty huge. So I'm going to try to not get too far out there, but if you look at right now, people who are trying to take this like optimistic ZK rollup approach on Bitcoin, it doesn't make Bitcoin cheaper. If every Bitcoin transaction moves there to 1, it'll make Bitcoin cheaper. But what we're actually seeing and what we saw from Babylon's launch yesterday is a lot of these things are making Bitcoin more expensive. And so what we really want is we want a place where we have 2 goals. So one for me is I want people to be immediately able to onboard to self-custody. So a problem that I have with something with Lightning, for example, is that it's quite difficult. If you're like, hey, I would like to invite my friend to like try Bitcoin and you want to send them a little, that's an experience I had in 2014 and it was very fun. And that experience doesn't really exist on L1 or on Lightning today because of the complexity. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that people can just have an address and receive. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that they can pay gas. And primarily in Bitcoin, so they shouldn't have to learn about other weird tech. They really shouldn't need to know the word blockchain, right? And then the other is that while we settle on Bitcoin, we don't currently plan to have our data available on Bitcoin. We're an alt-DA layer. And the reason that matters is we're not further congesting L1. Yeah, it's almost a tale as old as time, right? Like if you want to scale, have a separate space for your specific use case and don't make everything expensive for everyone else.
Can you describe the security mechanism in place for the Mezo and how it ensure the integrity of the transactions?
Of course, yeah. So Mezo follows a consensus mechanism called proof of HODL. So this is pretty different from your typical proof of stake chain. So in proof of stake, you can look at something like Ethereum and their proof of stake model, or you can look at DPoS, or you can look at the Cosmos SDK and Common BFT and all of these different models. And they all make trade-offs on like how large the validator set is and things like that. But what they almost all do is they all have a new native asset. And then they mint more of the native asset and inflation, and they use that to secure the chain. And so I thought, well, there are a few things wrong with that, right? So one, and we see this in the Cosmos type chain that launch all the time, is it's down only, right? So you have all these people who have bought all this token privately, and then they're getting all these emissions, and then they're selling it. And so anyone who gets involved in the ecosystem and buys the token and doesn't understand this, it goes down, and that's quite frustrating. Now, obviously, our goal is not number go up. Technology is a favorite nickname I have for Bitcoin, but like that, we can't control price. But what we can do is we can build a system that says, instead of you coming in with this asset you've never heard of and then getting insiders to dump on you, what if you came in with your favorite asset, which is your Bitcoin, and you actually secured the chain that way? So what we've done is we have a dual staking model. So what proof of HODL does is it says, okay, if you want to lock your Bitcoin, cool. All Bitcoin locked gets a third of token, basically gas fees. And the longer you lock your Bitcoin, the more of those fees you get. If you want to lock your Mezo, fantastic. This is how you secure the other 2/3 of the chain. The reason that's important is if you don't do that, any Bitcoin holder who's big enough can show up and take the chain over. And so if you're like a bridge or a consensus nerd, the term for that problem is typically called the exogenous asset problem. So what we do with proof of HODL is we bring Bitcoin holders in, we basically push as much fee revenue as we can to them. And then we also get to have this secure system that is fairly fast.
Okay, so the CGIS is behind the Mezo, and then in my research, CGIS issued the tBTC before. So how did your experience with developing the tBTC influence the design and the development of the Mezo?
Yeah, so our biggest learning we had 2, maybe 3 big learnings from tBTC. So I think the first on the economic side, right, it's just that having a bridge that's decentralized and secure is not enough. You need to have an ecosystem that people want to use. So I was really just like a product learning from us. But on the tech side, the learning was things need to be cheap and just crazy simple. And our first version of tBTC wasn't. It cost a lot of gas to use. It was fairly complex. People had to learn a lot about it. The next version, there's 2 transactions. There's a single Bitcoin deposit, and then there's a single transaction to claim on Ethereum or Arbitrum or Solana or whatever your chain is. And so what we've done is we've taken that same security model from tBTC v2, which uses we call it an honest majority with forward security, and we've taken that model. We've made it the basis of the Bitcoin custody in Mezo. So yeah, what else did we learn? Fragility. I think a lot of these chains that want to go for immutability immediately they end up realizing that they might not have product market fit and having to change something. And so one of the things that's been a big learning for us, our first version of tBTC was perfectly immutable. There were no upgrades, there was no governance except for I think 3 parameters. The second version of tBTC, we had to have the DAO be a lot more involved and slowly build out new features. And the reason was because the first one was just too structured and wasn't able to be flexible to the market. So that's another thing I think we've learned with Mezo and why we've stuck with Cosmos SDK is we know that we're going to need to make significant changes because you need to figure out what Bitcoin holders want to give it to them. And you can't just guess and launch a chain. And I think that that's what a lot of people are doing lately.
Yeah. So what are some of the major, like the hurdle you encountered during the development of Mezo, and how did you overcome this situation?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the struggles building Mezo have mostly been around education. So there aren't that many people who know Bitcoin. And I know that sounds weird because obviously there are a lot of people that hold it on the economic side. But on the tech side, most engineers and researchers are in the EVM or Solana ecosystems, or they're working on ZK rollups, and they really don't know anything about Satoshi's Bitcoin, right? They'll dig in and they'll realize that the language is underspecified, the core scripting language is underspecified, and they'll realize there's like off by one and indexing errors places, and we just work around them because Bitcoin was the first blockchain, so there's lots of stuff wrong with it. And it was not even though Satoshi showed some interest in making it a developer platform, it is the developer experience is really god awful. And so I think a lot of the hurdles we've run into have been, on the one hand, educating the public, educating investors, educating all sorts of people who think they know Bitcoin, but they actually just have it in an exchange account. On the other hand, making sure that while we obviously have a lot of talented devs who have been working for years on tBTC, as we grow, we have to teach. And so if I have someone who starts working on our team and they know Solidity or they know Rust or they know Go, they don't know Bitcoin, it's a pretty steep climb. And so really, I think the biggest hurdle for us has just been education, and that's something that we've been really focused on, and we're spending a lot of time on the rest of the year.
Okay. In my opinion, and then I feel like the Bitcoin community is very conservative, so it is very hard for them to accept like the altcoin or the other use case using the Bitcoin. So how has the Bitcoin community react to the launch of the Mezo so far? And then how do you plan to drive the adoption of the Mezo within the Bitcoin community?
So, I mean, well spotted. It is really conservative, but most people who hold Bitcoin aren't, right? So the silent majority of Bitcoin holders are people with Bitcoin on exchanges that just have never thought of Bitcoin as a productive asset before. And so that's why I keep going back to education. So like on the one hand, we have this big quiet group of holders. You don't hear from them much, but they're just waiting to be tapped into and to be invited to join the ecosystem. But then on the other, you have, some people call them Bitcoin maxis. I'm pretty close to one of them. And so I try not to throw the word around. But you have this group of people that is really conservative about Bitcoin being upgraded. And they're right. They're right because if we were upgrading Bitcoin all the time, well, Ethereum has that, Solana has that. We have other chains with that. Bitcoin's, the network that is Bitcoin, the reason it exists is to power this asset and this store of value. At least that's been the reason so far. Now, the flip side is the purpose of the system is what it does. So Satoshi is not, I assume he's dead at this point. Satoshi is not like hiding somewhere, guiding Bitcoin development. Whatever the network can do and whatever people will pay for, that's what the network is for, right? And so it really helped that as we started building Mezo, we saw this huge spike in ordinals because a lot of the Bitcoin community has just had this debate. And I think what, some people say, oh, I hate JPEGs or I hate BRC20s. But for the most part, the miners who tried to fight ordinals capitulated because they were losing so much money. And it's like, the market just, it's so arrogant to think exactly what the network is for and that and that you should be able to tell other people. And so I think, so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think a lot of the sentiment has shifted. There are people who are never going to change their mind and they're going to say things like Bitcoin should just be for financial use cases. Okay, if you just want financial use cases, you should pay. And and there's a free market that kind of decides what this block space is used for. So I agree with a lot of those more conservative folks on the network upgrade side because I think Bitcoin is the sort of banner project for our space, and it needs to be very, very carefully managed. But I totally disagree where they say it's just financial because I think, well, if your use case is the best, people will pay more for it.
So recently there is one controversial issue in the Bitcoin ecosystem, that is the WBTC. So what is your personal opinion on the market concept regarding spreading the
So-
WBTC.
So obviously, look, I run a competing project. I'm deeply biased. I have been really disappointed in our space and the embrace of WBTC since 2019, and when it really took off in 2020. So I think easy to make it like Justin Sun this or BitGo that. Like that's easy. The personality thing, it's fun, it's dramatic. People honestly in our space, sometimes I think they want to get hacked. Like they want news and they want things to happen, but it shouldn't matter what Justin Sun or BitGo is doing, right? Because this is a core piece of DeFi. So we've kind of gone the wrong way if what a couple people in a boardroom have decided is moving $9 billion of our economy. That was a mistake. I think my take is I don't know what will happen with WBTC. I personally have not been holding it for a long time. That's always kind of been my stance. And our phones have been ringing off the hook. Let's see. I think Aave was just in a news article saying they're planning on supporting tBTC. Synthetics just voted to support tBTC over WBTC on Arbitrum. So we're starting to see a big shift. It's a lot of TVL to move. So we'll see what happens. But I guess what I'm saying is if you're uncomfortable with WBTC, we have alternatives now and join us.
Yeah. And another controversial issue is OP-CAT. So do you think OP-CAT could be applied to the Bitcoin ecosystem? Of course, it takes a longer time, but eventually if the OP-CAT applied to the Bitcoin ecosystem, that is the game changer, I think.
Yeah, so I think the way that I look at OP-CAT and then other covenant opcodes, and really just any soft fork at all, it is arrogant and dangerous to start a company to change Bitcoin. Like every company we've seen started for the sole purpose of changing Bitcoin has failed. That said, as a developer, of course, I would like OP-CAT, right? There's so much. tBTC right now is trust minimized, and with OP-CAT, we can make it trustless. And the difference between that, obviously people are okay holding WBTC now and they have an alternative that's better. And so it's not clear to me that an alternative that's even better will get adoption. But as a developer, I want the power to do that. As a user and a holder of Bitcoin, though, I think that you need to move as slowly as possible with activating soft forks, because we've never, at least over the 11-year history I have in the space, we've not found a way that we're comfortable and confident activating an upgrade to Bitcoin. If you look at every single time, there's an argument about how are we going to do signaling? Is it going to be miner-led signaling? Is there going to be coin voting? And I think that because of that, the way the Bitcoin dev works is just the only things that go through are non-controversial. And what's great about that is that when we start to see governments try to capture Bitcoin, they won't be able to, because if anyone is bothered by it, the upgrade dies. So I'm a big fan of that. As a developer, it is incredibly frustrating, obviously, and I wish I had OP-CAT today. But as a user, it makes me feel a lot more comfortable holding Bitcoin long term.
I think it is my last question. And what is your vision for the future of the Mezo, and how do you see it evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, so I want to see a full end-to-end experience with Bitcoin that leaps over Ethereum and Solana and all of these places, because it does something different, right? So what I want to do with Mezo is really be this nexus where you can buy your first Bitcoin or earn your first, or stack sats, and you can immediately get them. You can get USD loans against them and get that, or KRW or whatever your favorite currency is, and get that sent to your bank. I want it to be, instead of feeling like a weird tech hobby, I want it to be a core part of everyone's really financial life. And that's what we're trying to do with Mezo. And that's not a tech story. We've had the tech to do that for a long time. That's an adoption and a sort of a social story. And so, so that's our goal. And I mean, that's why we've shipped all of these projects in the Bitcoin space. It's like we finally have this opportunity to plug them all together. Yeah. So really, my goal for Mezo is to get 25% of the world's economy running on Bitcoin. That's what I'm trying to do. I don't know if it's going to happen in 2 years, but yeah, that's the plan.
Thank you for sharing. So do you have a last word for the Korean community?
Yes, of course. If you're holding WBTC, maybe reconsider. We would love to help you. And if you're interested in keeping track of Mezo, check it out at mezo.org. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm MH Longo. And we're excited to see everyone at Korean Blockchain Week.
Yeah, thank you so much.